The Dallas Cowboys have interviewed Jonathan Gannon for their next defensive coordinator job, and it seems like there's a pretty good chance he might get that role. We'll talk about it next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. And on today's show, we are discussing the Cowboys defensive coordinator search. We're going to talk about Zack Orr. We're going to talk about all the movement across the NFL. But Landon, let's start with this. The Cowboys interviewed Jonathan Gannon on Tuesday. He is a well-respected defensive mind. If he ends up being the Cowboys' next defensive coordinator, what can we expect to get?
We can expect a lot of quarters coverage, right? Like this guy I think he led the Arizona Cardinals led the league in quarters usage, if I'm not mistaken, or at least they were well ahead of the second place the last time I checked. And I think that, Gannon is a very modern kind of defensive coordinator. He understands how to attack offenses. He understands how to have success against a Shanahan offense. We saw that, over and over again in his time in the AFC West. I mean, despite having
NFC West. Yep.
I'm sorry, NFC West. Yes. Despite not having necessarily the top end talent at times. I mean, sometimes he had some talent and sometimes they had first round picks that didn't quite make sense of the positions that they were supposed to be playing. So I think he made a lot of positive improvements to that defense, despite some hit and miss personnel there. And then obviously you go back to his time with the Eagles and he was a major part to why they went to the Super Bowl. So I think he's a guy that, we talked about it early on. There's a lot of really good candidates this year. We've harped on a couple of that we really, really like. But the truth is that Jonathan Gannon is one of these guys that we haven't spoken a ton about. But if he ended up the defensive coordinator, I would be absolutely over the moon because I think he's exactly the kind of guy that you're looking for, whether you're Jerry Jones and you want the former head coach for the security, or you're like us that wants a modern defensive coordinator who has shown the ability to get the most out of the personnel that he's been given and create defenses that create plays and win games.
All right, so let's talk about the positives before I be a typical wet blanket at the next part of it. One of the things that I'm fascinated by is it seems like, at least with a lot of the names that have been mentioned or have interviewed, there is a defensive background. And that's, the case with Jim Leonhard, obviously. But if you look at Jonathan Gannon's history, he was a cornerbacks coach or a defensive backs coach for like 9 years. Like he's got a lot of experience coaching defensive backs. He then became the defensive coordinator in Philadelphia and then the head coach in Arizona. It seems like that's the one spot that they're identifying is they want someone that knows how to figure out coverages and what's the best way to stop, Kyle Shanahan, a Sean McVay. And that part is really appealing to me.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about on yesterday's show, right? Where like, let's get the dudes in the pass rush and we'll scheme up the coverage, right? And I think maybe they're approaching it that the same way is that if they can get just a couple more dudes to make this defensive line look solid and get after the passer, you can scheme up the coverage stuff if you get the right personnel and the right coaches in here.
He's also pretty young. I think he's in his early 40s. He actually started as a coach when he was 20. He was an assistant at Louisville and has kind of worked his way up. He's been in the NFL since 2007. So he's been around it for a long time. I do think he's innovative, and I've seen them play some awesome games. And honestly, their game against Dallas this year, I mean, they were doing some wild stuff, and it had Dak Prescott and Brian Schottenheimer confused, and I have to believe that's one of the reasons why they brought him in for an interview. And maybe it's for the defensive coordinator job. I also wouldn't be surprised, Landon, if it's like, hey, you did a great job of stopping us over the last couple of years. Tell us what went wrong or how you attacked us. A little bit of self-scouting here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big reason that some of these teams bring in some of these interviews, and that's not necessarily saying that that's why Gannon's in here, but it certainly is a benefit, right? Like, I mean, you get the opportunity to kind of pick their brains on what they thought about the Cowboys offense, and what they think about the Cowboys defense is obviously going to come up too. So, yeah, I agree. I think it's an opportunity to kind of learn a little bit about a coach that you respect, and frankly, like you said, I mean, he's played the Cowboys extremely tough whenever they faced him, and I think you've got a quarterback who is as good as any quarterback in the league at diagnosing defenses. So when you run into a defense coordinator that causes some pause, again, especially with the kind of personnel that they've had over the years in and out at different points, I think you at least want to pick their brain and certainly see if they're up to the job, and if not, maybe just some ideas on how to improve the offense, or maybe with the direction they want to go on the defense.
And here's a couple surface level stats. Again, this is not the end all be all, so just take these with a grain of salt. He's been a play caller on defense for 5 years. In those 5 years, his team has ranked in the top half of the league in passing yards 4 different times. They were kind of up and down a little bit if you look at like yards per attempt and net yards per attempt, but generally pretty good in coverage. The issue with Gannon, and because you play a lot of quarters and you've got some, lighter boxes, is the rushing yards. Listen to his yards per attempt allowed over the last 5 years. 6 in 2021, and then 24, 29, 25, 24. You look at the rushing touchdowns, he's given up at least 23 rushing touchdowns in 3 of the 5 seasons. You could probably expect the Cowboys to be a very middling run defense again if you hired again.
I mean, I think if you were going to, I would love to hear what Cody Alexander has to say about this, but I think that if you look at the other defense coordinators or people that are similar to him, to me, the guy that is closest is probably Brandon Staley, right? And Staley, Staley suffered from the same sort of issue, and I think that part of that is that they both kind of came, to age during that end of peak passing era, right? Where defensive coordinators were, and even Quinn kind of is maybe falls into that category a little bit, where there are a certain category of defensive coordinators that in 5 or 6 years ago were willing to sacrifice the run almost all the way to win with the pass. And I think that he's one of these guys that scheme wise is willing to sacrifice pieces on this chessboard in order to stop the pass, because the idea that passing is ultimately how offenses are trying to win these games. Now,
is that the right way to go in 2026? I'm genuinely asking, because you're seeing more, 13 personnel. You're even seeing more like 6 offensive line packages. Like, I honestly wonder, are we going back to a little bit where stopping the run is, at least in early downs, more important than stopping the pass?
That's literally where I was going to go, is because I do think that the game has changed. And that's the problem, right? Is that they got in right at the tail end of the peak passing era. And now in the last, let's say, 2 years, probably, the game is not completely changed the other way. I don't think we're going back to 1987 football, but I do think that the ratio of run to pass is going to start trending a little bit more towards balance, and the importance of the run game, especially because of guys like Brandon Staley and Jonathan Gannon. It has become back in fashion, because these defenses were doing a good job of stopping the pass and creating problems. So teams started going back to, how do we get that safety? How do we get that second safety start dropping back down to the box? You start running the football at their 215-pound, nickel linebackers, and then suddenly teams are going to start wanting more men in the box again, and the cycle continues.
So, just to wrap it up here on Gannon, I think generally you would be excited with the hire because he does have experience. He's young. He's willing to mix things up, but he doesn't come without flaws and warts.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think part of it too is, personnel is going to need to be a part of stopping the run. If we're going to have Gannon here, they're going to need to make sure that they have the right personnel to physically handle that. So what does that mean? You might need to invest a little bit more in kind of more two-way linebackers, just to be able to handle the extra load that's going to be asked upon you for being a running back. I mean, for running the scheme against the running game. So yeah, it's just something that, you have to add into your calculus when you're thinking about how you're building this defense top to bottom, from coaching and personnel.
All right, let's talk about another name that has popped up, and that is Zack Orr, who is currently, or at least was, the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. He was in the building on Tuesday. Could he be their next defensive coach? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gusto. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets. And that's where Gusto comes in to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so that you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. And whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or the hidden fees. And unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price means that there's no surprise charges at the end of the month. So try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. And one more time, that is gusto.com/LockedOnNFL.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. If you haven't done so already, check out the new Everydayer Club. For just $5 a month, you're going to get access to ad-free audio of the Locked On Cowboys podcast, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every major podcast app. Go to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, Lena, let's talk about Zack Orr, who the Cowboys have had an interview with. He was the Ravens defensive coordinator over the last 2 years. Is this someone who interests you as a potential guy to run the defense?
I think all of these candidates fall into one of three buckets, right? There's the guy that is either going to get a head coaching job or he's going to be one of the top defensive coordinator types, right? The Brian Flores falls into that, obviously. There's the guy that is solidly a defensive coordinator, right? Probably not going to get a head coaching job or doesn't have any interest in getting a head coaching job, but is definitely a defensive coordinator, and the guy calling plays has experience, usually doing that. And then Zack Orr falls into this third bucket where he has been a defensive coordinator in the NFL. He has experience, but he hasn't had a ton of experience. And in the last year, I mean, really 50% of his experience hasn't always been great, right? And it's hard to kind of get a read on some of these guys and try to figure out, like, are these definitely situations where you are looking for a defensive coordinator, or are you like you mentioned before, interviewing a guy just to kind of pick his brain a little bit about something that you're interested in, maybe against the Cowboys. I know that wasn't necessarily the case this year, but I mean, he's obviously been around. He's seen the tape. He's been around the league. Or are you hiring this guy, or are you interviewing this guy with the idea of maybe hiring him as a defensive coordinator or as a position coach? Like if you feel like you're interested in him as a coach, maybe developing him a little bit, because again, he only called plays for 2 years at Baltimore. And before that, he was a top lieutenant at Mike McDonald's. Maybe he just needs a little bit more time kind of developing, or maybe, he's a defensive coordinator. I don't know, but I think you don't really find out about these kind of guys who have, interesting but very light resumes unless you kind of bring them in and interview them.
So just a couple of things that I've, heard or just talked to people about everybody that talks about Zack Orr thinks he's incredibly smart. If you remember him as a player, like he was on his way to becoming one of the best linebackers in the league. And then I think it was a neck injury that he suffered that forced him to retire at a very young age. He became a defensive analyst for the Ravens at age 25. So like he's been around for a little bit. He was a outside linebacker coach for Urban Meyer's Jaguars, which is kind of funny. And then he came back to Baltimore. He was the inside linebacker coach for 2 years under Mike Macdonald. And then he went from inside linebackers to the defensive coordinator. And that was a big jump. And I think the concern is in 2024, the defense was really good. But that was with a lot of Mike Macdonald's players running his scheme. The further you get away from the Mike Macdonald impact in Baltimore, the worse that defense has gotten. And you saw it play out this year where whenever they played a decent team, they kind of got crushed, whether it was New England or Pittsburgh late in the year. The Texans scored 44 points on them. They beat up on a lot of bad teams middle of the year. I don't know if he's going to get another defensive coaching or a coordinator job, but I do think he's somebody that would be really nice to have in your building, either as a linebacker coach or as a consultant. I think he's incredibly bright. I would love to have him here. I just think defensive coordinator might be too big of a step.
Yeah. And I think that, the resume looks like one that you wouldn't necessarily see someone who's obviously and only walking in under that second bucket, right? Obviously a defensive coordinator. He's only done it for 2 years. Like you mentioned, he's very young. He doesn't have a ton of experience necessarily for a guy that's being considered for a defensive coordinator. And the experience he has is uneven. So I don't think it's unrealistic to think that he might be interviewed in for more than just the defensive coordinator role. Right. Just they're interested in the guy. They want to see what he's like. Yeah, is this someone's mind that we want inside the building with kind of consulting on this? Maybe that's a great role for him. Maybe he's a linebacker coach for someone that likes him. So there's lots of opportunities here, and I think they've got to hire a lot of coaches, and not even just defensive coordinator being a high profile one. They need a lot of good coaches. So casting a wide net, even if to find other guys. And obviously Zack Orr has a history with Schottenheimer. That's how he got this job from the Jaguars, right? But I think that it's important to kind of ask all these guys, give them opportunities to at least say, hey, I interviewed with the Dallas Cowboys, and in exchange, maybe you get some good information out of them or an opportunity for them to be a position coach.
A couple stats on Orr that we should mention. They were first in rushing yards in 2024. They were 10th this year in terms of rushing attempts and yards per attempt, number 1 in 2024, number 11 in 2025. So he is really good at stopping the run. We should also point out that he kind of sells out to stop the run on first and second down. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's also, I think, a little bit tied into the division that he played in with Pittsburgh and Cleveland, who were so run heavy. The drawback to that, this is the opposite of Gannon, 31st in passing yards allowed in 2024, 30th in passing yards allowed in 2025, 30th in attempts both years. They gave up a bunch of touchdowns. His style is load the box on first and second down, and on third downs, he's going to blitz and play a lot of man-to-man coverage. You've got to have the corners to do that. And that's where Baltimore over the last couple of years, relying on, Chidobe Awuzie and a older Marlon Humphrey, has kind of cost them in these bigger spots.
Yeah, maybe you just need to get Gannon as your DC and Orr as your linebacker coach, right? Yeah, and then you got the whole thing covered. Yeah, I do think it's going to be interesting to see kind of what sort of role this guy ends up with, even if he's not with the Cowboys, what sort of role he ends up with next year, because there's just a lot of defensive coordinator candidates. So I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't get a DC job, even if it wasn't with the Dallas, just because there's only a certain amount of seats and there's tons of these defensive guys out this year.
Well, and there's a lot of quality defensive-minded head coach options, including guys like Jesse Minter or Chris Shula. And I think those guys are going to gobble up some of these jobs as well. But let's talk about the coaching carousel, because I do think that's going to have a big impact on what the Cowboys do. We'll get into some of the latest news next. This episode is brought to you by Quo. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades that you could make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your whole team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. I love how simple Quo makes everything. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nobody misses anything. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replying faster and more personal. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNFL. That is quo.com/LockedOnNFL. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. This episode is brought to you by Home Chef. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner is a big one. Between busy work days, cold winter nights, which I certainly know, and packed schedules, having an easy and reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. And that's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy to follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why. Meals come ready to fit your schedule, 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, or quick lunches. And with over 30 weekly options, including family-sized meals and different dietary choices, everybody is going to get a meal that fits them. And for a limited time, Home Chef is offering our listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Again, that is 50% off your first box, plus free shipping and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Landon, let's talk about some of the other coaching news going around the league, because it's been a while.
It's crazy.
We've got 9 guys that are available, or spots that are available. Nobody has taken a job yet. I think they're all waiting on John Harbaugh to make a decision. And honestly, where he goes is probably going to decide where the Cowboys go at defensive coordinator, because if Harbaugh takes the Giants job, I don't know if Vance Joseph gets a job. And if Vance Joseph doesn't get a job, that means that Jim Leonhard's probably going to take a defensive coordinator job. So there's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, and I mean, Harbaugh is probably the one that is the most related to the Cowboys situation, right? Because of what you just mentioned. But I mean, I have to say, the news about Tomlin being released is just as league shattering, I would say. Mm-hmm. And certainly, it cranked the wheel on the coaching carousel just as fast, right, as Harbaugh. So, yeah, I think to have the Harbaugh situation happen, and then suddenly to have his division mate, kind of have the similar situation of, almost, basically longer tenured guy that probably will be in equal demand, I would imagine, despite obviously the reasons that he got let go in the first place. I think it's going to have a huge impact, and obviously it's already having a huge impact across the league.
Well, and I think you've talked about like Mike Tomlin and the Steelers. One name that has kind of come up over and over again is Brian Flores, who has coached with the Steelers. It was a couple of years ago. He was the linebacker coach under Mike Tomlin. He just seems like the type of coach that would fit in well in the AFC North. And if that's the case, that's one less option for the Cowboys. We've heard rumblings now for a couple of weeks that the Cowboys have been interested in Brian Flores, but if he gets a head coaching job, that's one less candidate to go after. However, there's not going to be a shortage of candidates. It feels very much like this is one of the better cycles And I'll give you another one. Jim Schwartz with the Browns. It came out on Monday that the Browns would prefer to keep Schwartz, but that's not a guarantee. That's their preference. If they hire a defensive-minded head coach like a Jesse Minter or a Chris Shula, I got to believe that Schwartz is going to be available, and that's another name the Cowboys would love to talk to.
Yeah, and kind of just to what you were saying before, like the other side of obviously the names that are getting out of the carousel is the seats, right? The places. And Pittsburgh is, despite how Marcus may feel about Pittsburgh is a premier place to take a coaching job. I mean, maybe the top of this list. I mean, the Baltimore Ravens are in a premier organization, one of the best in the league. But I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers, whether you like it or not, are the Baltimore Ravens and the Dallas Cowboys combined in some ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's like a Supreme Court seat, right? Like you're there for as long as you want to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's high profile, and you're going to get every single call by the refs.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, it doesn't really matter who the coach is. You're going to get every call. So I think it's going to make for more opportunities for guys to go here and there. Obviously, put another name on the carousel, which helps you. But at the same time, like Mike Tomlin is a big fish, but not as in relation to Pittsburgh as a destination. So you may lose out a little bit because Pittsburgh becomes such a destination that, you know, and again, a spot where tough football is valued, where defensive coordinators are valued. So might be a good spot for a defensive minded head coach to end up at.
I'm also curious to see if you have a couple of these guys start taking jobs before waiting around too long. Like, for example, maybe Jim Leonhard takes the defensive coordinator job in Dallas instead of waiting for potentially the Denver job to open up, right? Because you don't want to be the last one, to get a spot. And I do think there's only so many of these jobs available. And maybe if you're a Jim Schwartz, you just say, you know what, hey, I don't want to wait around to maybe get this Cleveland job. I'm going to go take the Dallas defensive coordinator job and figure it out. That's going to happen. Like, you're going to start seeing these seats get filled over the next week.
Yeah, and I think it's probably someone at the Jim Leonhard level, right? Because you think that guys like Jim Schwartz, no matter what, like he's not going to end up without a seat. Whether it's a defensive coordinator position at Cleveland, I feel like you're right. He may decide to do that, and that was an example. But like I do think it's more the Jim Leonhard level of guys that is a name, but maybe not so guaranteed to end up with the job unless he is a little aggressive and takes.
I'll give you a different example. Raheem Morris is interviewing for several head coaching jobs. I would be shocked if he gets a third chance. I mean, he's already failed twice. If he kind of strings this out and he doesn't get a head coaching job, would I be surprised if all these other defensive coordinator jobs fill up and he doesn't get one? No, I wouldn't. So maybe while he's still, hoping to get a head coaching job, maybe he settles for a defensive coordinator job in Dallas or in one of these different spots. I think you're going to see some movement like that over the next few days.
Every one of these jobs is different, and every one of these people is different in what they're looking for. The mixing and matching of that is always very interesting. So anything can happen here.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Cowboys ad-free plus members-only Discord access and so much more. Head over to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com to join the club. And for those of you on video, we can send you the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. On audio, make your second listen the Locked On NFL podcast. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.